The courtroom went silent when the judge looked up from the financial statement. "Mr. Wickham, you appear to have misunderstood the financial position of your wife." My husband stopped smiling. Across the aisle, his attorney shifted in his chair. Behind them, my mother-in-law, Judith, went pale. The judge turned another page. "According to these records, your wife's net worth is approximately $28.7 million. Judith stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. Then she collapsed. Gideon stared at me like I'd become a stranger. But here's the strangest part. I never wanted him to know about the money. Not because I was ashamed of it. Because 3 weeks earlier, I still believed I was married to a man who loved me. This is the story of how that stopped being true. 3 weeks before that courtroom, I sat in a quiet law office in Columbus, Ohio, listening to an attorney read my grandfather's will. Arthur had never talked about money. He wore the same brown wool coat for years, drove an old Buick, and complained if anyone spent $10 on coffee. Everyone assumed he was a modest, retired businessman. I knew better. I just never knew how much better. My mother sat beside me. My children, Eli and June, sat near the window. My husband, Gideon, had taken the afternoon off work. The attorney, Evelyn Rusk, adjusted her glasses. There are several personal bequests, but the principal beneficiary is Mara. Me. There were investment accounts, commercial properties, shares in a private company, and a family trust set up in my name years earlier. My grandfather hadn't just left me money. He'd left me control. Why didn't he ever tell me? I whispered. Evelyn smiled gently. Because Arthur believed that knowing too early could change how people treated you. That sentence would stay with me, especially a moment later, when Gideon leaned in and asked quietly, "How much?" "I don't know yet," I said. "You must have some idea." "I really don't." He leaned back. And for the first time that afternoon, I saw something new in his expression. Not happiness for me, calculation. The next morning he asked again. "So what did Evelyn say?" "There's a trust. I don't know the size yet. We're meeting again next week." He nodded slowly. "You're lucky," he said. "Not we're lucky. You're lucky. Then we'll need to talk about how we're going to handle everything." At the time, I thought he meant our future. I was wrong. A few days later, the kids and I decided to surprise Gideon on his business trip to Chicago. June wanted to bring his favorite cheesecake. Eli wanted to see the city. We flew out Friday, planning to catch him after his last meeting. At the hotel restaurant, I saw him before he saw us. He wasn't alone. A woman in a navy blazer stood close, her hand on his arm. He laughed at something she said. I froze. Eli bumped into my shoulder. I put a hand up. "Stay here," and listened. "Are you sure she won't fight you?" The woman asked. Gideon smiled. "She doesn't have the money to fight me." My stomach dropped. "And the inheritance. Once the divorce is filed, we'll find out exactly what she has." A pause. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." I stood behind a column, listening to the man I'd loved for 16 years discuss the end of our marriage like a business deal. I had two choices: confront him or stay quiet long enough to understand what he was planning. I chose silence. Not weakness, strategy. We flew home that night. On the plane, Eli finally asked, "Why didn't we surprise Dad?" "You'll understand something important before you're ready to hear it," I said quietly. After the kids fell asleep, I called Evelyn and told her everything. Long silence. Then, "Do not confront him yet. If Gideon is already planning around your inheritance, we need to know exactly what he's done." Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. "Mara, someone has already contacted my office asking questions about your grandfather's trust." "Your husband's attorney." I sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the fridge light. In 3 weeks, that same man would stand in a courtroom and laugh in my face. He thought I was broke. He thought I was frightened. He had no idea what my grandfather had left me, and even less idea what I'd just learned about him. The next morning, Evelyn spread documents across her conference table. "Before we talk about the trust, understand this: anything you say about the estate could become part of a legal strategy. He knows something exists. That's not the same as knowing how much. Let's keep it that way. I asked her something I'd never had to think about before. Is my inheritance actually mine? Or does getting married change that? Evelyn set down her pen. That depends entirely on how the assets are structured and how they're kept. Property you inherit is typically separate from what you build together in a marriage, but only if it stays separate. The moment inherited money gets mixed into joint accounts, joint mortgages, joint anything, that line gets blurry fast. That's usually the first thing a divorce attorney looks for. So if I deposited some of it into our checking account, it could have become a much longer conversation. You didn't, because you didn't know about it yet. That timing may end up mattering more than anything else in this case. It was the first time I understood that financial literacy wasn't a luxury for wealthy people, it was protection. I'd spent 16 years assuming Gideon understood money because he talked about it more than I did. I was starting to realize confidence and competence aren't the same thing. Then she slid over an email sent by someone representing Gideon to a financial institution, asking how assets in a family trust are valued during divorce. The date stopped me cold. Sent 2 days before the will reading. How could he know? I asked. That's what we need to find out. I drove home without calling him. He was already at the kitchen island, laptop open, wearing the sweater I'd bought him for Christmas. For a second, the sight of him almost broke my resolve. This was the man who'd held my hand at my father's funeral. Did the attorney tell you about the properties? He asked, too casually. I don't know yet. You don't have to be secretive with me. I almost laughed. He had no idea how strange that sounded after Chicago. I'm just saying, he pushed. Whatever your grandfather left you, we need to make smart decisions. We're a family. For years, that word had meant safety. That night, it sounded like leverage. That was the first night I locked important documents in a safe. It was also the first night I started replaying the last few years differently, Gideon asking about my grandfather's commercial property, pushing me to sign refinancing papers without reading them, suddenly interested in my accounts once Arthur got sick. I'd called it curiosity. Now I wondered if it had been preparation. Monday morning, a process server handed me divorce papers. Gideon hadn't even waited to talk to me first. The petition asked for temporary control over marital assets and cited potential undisclosed assets. He was accusing me of hiding money. While he'd already been investigating my inheritance for weeks, that afternoon he came home and dropped a folder on the table. You should sign these. Simplify things. I didn't touch it. You don't have the money to fight me, Mara. Our son Eli was standing in the hallway. He'd heard everything. Mom doesn't need money to be our mom, he said. This is an adult conversation. You're the one who said she doesn't make real money. I sent Eli upstairs. Then looked at Gideon. You made this harder the moment you decided my value depended on what you thought I owned. He left without another word that night. Alone in my grandfather's study, I opened a drawer and found a handwritten note. Dated 6 months before his death. Mara, people may treat you differently when they discover what I've left you. Remember, their reaction is about them, not you. Protect what I've entrusted to you, but never let money convince you that you're worth more than anyone else. Your character was always the inheritance I cared about most. I cried. Not because of the money, because my grandfather had understood something I hadn't. Wealth reveals people. And Gideon was revealing himself. The next morning, I called Evelyn. I want to know everything. We'll start with the trust, she said. And Gideon, we let him keep believing he knows what he's dealing with. For 16 years, I tried to keep the peace in my marriage. Now I wasn't trying to destroy Gideon. I was simply going to stop protecting him from the consequences of his own choices over the next days. I went through filing cabinets and old boxes and found copies of documents Gideon had once pushed me to sign, a commercial property authorization, broad access to an account I barely used. I photographed everything and sent it to Evelyn. Her reply, do not discuss these with Gideon. These may be important. How important? He hadn't transferred ownership of your inheritance. He couldn't. but he was positioning himself to understand what you own and what he might eventually claim. That evening, Gideon wanted to talk, just the two of us. He sat across from me. I don't want this to get ugly. You filed before you told me. You hired a lawyer before you told me. I was protecting myself. You could have asked me. I did, and you said you didn't know. I didn't know what he was leaving me. I knew he had assets. That's not the same thing. You always do this, he said. Pretend. You don't understand how things work. Something in me went quiet. Not angry, clear. You've already decided who I am in your mind. He didn't deny it. Instead, I think we should sell the house. No, and I'm not signing your attorney's agreement. You haven't even read it. My attorney has. I'm going to make this fair. You're going to regret this. I already regret something, I said, trusting you without asking enough questions. The next morning, Gideon formally requested full disclosure of my trust, investments, and property records. Evelyn wasn't surprised. Let him ask. The law gives him what it gives him. Nothing more. Then she showed me something that changed everything. Emails between Gideon and his attorney. If the trust is as large as I think it is, we need to move quickly. She won't know what she's entitled to. We can negotiate from there. He hadn't filed for divorce because our marriage had failed. He'd filed as a financial negotiation, believing I was too uninformed to know the difference. What do we do? I asked Evelyn. We let the evidence speak. 2 days later, Judith stopped by the house and announced, while Gideon was still at work. She stood on the porch in her cream coat, smiling the way she always did when she wanted something. I just came to see how you're holding up, she said, stepping past me into the kitchen before I'd invited her in. This must all be so overwhelming. All these ... decisions. I'm managing, of course you are. She glanced around the kitchen like she was pricing it. You know, Gideon's always looked out for this family. Whatever happens with your grandfather's estate, I hope you'll remember that loyalty should go both ways. Is that why you came, Judith? She smiled thinly. I came because I love my son, and because families should stay together, especially when there's a lot at stake. After she left, I stood in the kitchen for a long time. She hadn't asked once how I was grieving my grandfather. Not once had she said his name. That night, June asked me at dinner if we'd be okay. Yes, I told her. Eli asked quietly if Dad had left because of the money. No, I said. Your father made his choices. The money only showed us what those choices meant. I opened my grandfather's letter again. Protect what I entrusted to you. I finally understood he hadn't meant the money. He'd meant me. The first formal conference was in a small downtown office. Gideon looked relaxed, almost triumphant. When I walked in, Maura, there's no reason this has to become hostile, he said. I agree, I said. It doesn't have to become hostile, but it has to be honest. His attorney argued the inheritance should factor into the marital division and pressed for further examination of the trust. Evelyn calmly slid over the already completed trust review. You'll receive what you're legally entitled to. Nothing more. Then Evelyn opened a second folder. In your filing, Mr. Wickham, you stated your wife's financial position was uncertain, that she may have concealed assets. Yet your correspondence with your own attorney shows you were investigating the trust before you filed. Gideon's confidence flickered. I didn't know the exact amount. You knew about the trust. You contacted a financial institution about accessing it. I was asking questions. That's exactly what the records show. Then she read the email aloud, the one about moving quickly, about me not knowing what I was entitled to. Gideon closed his eyes. His attorney asked if he'd written it. Yes, he admitted. Then, quieter. My mother shouldn't have gotten involved either. Evelyn produced one more message from Judith. If Arthur left her the properties, don't let her walk away with everything. Gideon has a right to his share. Judith had never once asked how I was grieving my grandfather. She'd asked about the property. Gideon's attorney tried one more angle, arguing that even if the trust was separate, 16 years of marriage meant Gideon had contributed to its growth simply by being present while it accrued value. Evelyn didn't even raise her voice. Mr. Wickham never managed, advised on, or contributed labor to any asset in this trust. He didn't know it existed until 6 weeks ago. Presence isn't a contribution. The attorney had no answer for that. Gideon looked down at the table. The conference ended with nothing settled on paper, but something had shifted. Gideon could no longer play the victim of a secretive wife. His own paper trail was speaking for him. Outside, in the cold, he caught up to me. "You don't understand what this money is going to do." "I understand exactly what it's doing," I said. "It's showing me who people are. You think you're better than me now." "No, I think I'm finally seeing you clearly. For a second I saw the man I'd married, tired, scared, human. Then I remembered Chicago. She doesn't have the money to fight me." With her sympathy, I had disappeared. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth on record. And I knew it would reach the courtroom. I woke early the morning of the final hearing, got dressed in a navy suit, and looked tired but not weak. 16 years of marriage had taught me some battles aren't won by being loud. They're won by staying calm long enough for the truth to become impossible to ignore. Gideon was already seated, confident, almost cheerful, when I walked in. Behind him, Judith sat in a cream suit, composed. She caught my eye and looked away. The attorneys worked through the house, the vehicles, the children's arrangements. Then Gideon's attorney raised the inheritance again, questioning whether it should be considered marital property. Evelyn stood. "These assets exist. They were inherited through a trust established by my client's grandfather and were not acquired through the marital partnership. No shouting. No accusations. Just documents. Truth doesn't need to raise its voice." The judge turned to Gideon directly. "Did you have knowledge of this trust before filing for divorce?" "I knew there might be an inheritance. Did you investigate it beforehand?" I asked questions through counsel. "Then your filing's characterization of your wife's financial position as uncertain is somewhat misleading." Gideon said nothing. The judge reviewed the final appraisal, then looked at me. "Mrs. Wickham, are these records accurate to the best of your knowledge? Have you concealed any assets from this court?" "No." He turned back to Gideon. "The verified records place her current net worth at approximately $20.7 million. The room went completely still. Gideon's face changed, not anger, not disbelief. "Regret. You never told me," he said. "You never asked what I needed. You asked what you could take. So she gets all of it." He asked the judge. "That's not what I said," the judge answered. Substantial inherited assets didn't automatically make them marital property. That depended on how they were inherited, titled, and maintained. Behind us, Judith rose. 28 million. Her face drained of color. She reached for the back of a chair, and her knees gave out. The room dissolved into motion as people rushed to help her. The judge called a recess. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. This wasn't how I'd wanted any of it to happen. During the recess, people moved around the room in a blur, a bailiff bringing water. Judith's eyes fluttering open, her hand gripping her chair like the floor might tilt again. Gideon knelt beside her for a moment, then stood and looked for me across the room. He approached. "I didn't know it was that much, I know. If I'd known, that's exactly the problem," I said. "You loved the life you thought I could provide? You never loved the person standing beside you. You filed for divorce because you thought I was worth less than you. Now that you know I'm worth more, you want to know if there's a way back." He had nothing to say. The proceedings continued. Gideon's attempt to claim a share of the inheritance was rejected under the law. And sitting there, I realized what I'd actually been afraid of losing wasn't the trust, or the properties, or the $28 million. It was my children, my dignity, and the simple ability to wake up without wondering if someone beside me was measuring my worth in numbers. When the hearing ended, Gideon stood near the courthouse doors, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't know what to say. Neither did I, so I walked past him, not out of hatred, but because I was finally ready to walk toward a life he could no longer control. 3 months later, life was quieter. Not magically healed, just quieter. Gideon moved into an apartment across town, and we settled into a parenting rhythm. Every school pickup, every soccer game, every night June wanted her room checked, I showed up. There was no affection left between us, but eventually, there was something close to respect. One Saturday, Gideon showed up early and asked to talk. "I've been going to counseling," he said. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, that I lost you because I thought you were worthless when I believed you were poor." "I deserved that." His voice dropped. "I spent years thinking earning more money made me more important. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. I'm glad you're seeing it now. Do you ever think we could?" He stopped himself. "I know," I said gently. And he nodded and let it go. No argument, no pleading. Maybe he really was changing. Before he left, he stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a second. "For what it's worth, you were always a good mother. I just never told you that when it mattered. You can tell them," I said, nodding toward the door. "That's the one that matters now." He almost smiled. "Yeah, I can do that." That afternoon, I visited Judith. She looked smaller than I remembered, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "I owe you an apology," she said. When I heard about the inheritance, I thought about what it could do for Gideon, about security. "I didn't think about you. My grandfather always said money reveals character." I told her. "I suppose it revealed mine. It revealed everyone's." She asked what I planned to do with it all. I told her, something my grandfather would approve of. I kept enough to secure my children's future and manage the properties responsibly, and used the rest to set up an education fund for Eli and June, and a small foundation supporting financial literacy in local communities. Not glamorous, just useful. I learned things the hard way that I wished I'd known years earlier, that a trust protects differently than a will. That inherited money mixed carelessly into a marriage gets complicated fast. And that the smartest first move with any inheritance isn't a new house or an announcement. It's finding people who actually understand the law. I also started teaching Eli and June, in small ways, the things nobody had taught me. June, at 12, now keeps a notebook of her own savings and asks real questions about interest and accounts. Eli, older and quieter about it, started asking me about the foundation, how we chose who to help, how we decided what enough looked like. I didn't expect the hardest year of my life to also become the year my children learned what money actually is, a tool, not a measure of anyone's worth. I also learned something about marriage. Love doesn't mean surrendering financial awareness. Trust doesn't mean signing what you don't understand. And raising your children full-time doesn't mean your contribution has no value. For years, I let Gideon's paycheck become the measure of my worth. That was my mistake. Believing it to was his. One evening on the back porch, June leaned against my shoulder. "Are you happier now?" "Yes," I told her, and meant it. Eli said quietly, "I think Dad's happier too. He doesn't act angry anymore. Sometimes people have to lose something before they understand what they had," I said. Then June asked if they still had to call him Dad. And we all laughed for the first time in months, sitting there. I finally understood my grandfather's letter completely. The real inheritance was never the 20-8-point-7 million dollars. It was the lesson underneath it. Know your worth before someone else tries to define it for you. And never confuse wealth with character. Gideon thought he was leaving a poor woman. He discovered he was leaving a wealthy one. But that was never the real twist. The real twist is that by the time the judge read my net worth out loud, I had already found something worth far more. My own worth. The money changed my circumstances. The truth changed me. If this story reminded you of your own life, take a moment to think about what your real inheritance is. Maybe it isn't money. Maybe it's the wisdom of someone who raised you, or the courage it took to start over. And if anyone ever underestimated you, tell your story in the comments below. Someone reading it might need it today.